Oh, Rimworld. Everyone loves to focus on how you let the player turn prisoners into food rations and jackets. But there's so much more to you, isn't there? There is more to you, right? I think that it's impossible to talk about Rimworld without telling a story. When describing the game to people, the default method is to explain the events of a colony you played rather than try to explain exactly how it actually works mechanically. So here's the story of the Fun Guys. A group of cave-dwelling slavers that live on a new wave fad diet consisting of fungus and people. It's supposed to give you super clear skin or something, I think. To achieve this diet, they'll be turning their prisoners into food rations and jacket. Oh. Well, I guess the Rimworld prophecy has fulfilled itself again. In my defense though, the random world seed when I generated this planet was just Cannibal. I mean, for real, how could I play any other kind of ideologian after that? What's an ideologian? Oh right, yeah. If you haven't played Rimworld at all, or haven't played it since the ideology expansion, then let me quickly explain. Ideologians are a way for you to specialize your colony towards a certain way of living. All of your starting colonists will follow your chosen ideologian, but other Rimworlders you encounter will have their own, sometimes diametrically opposed beliefs. Luckily, the folks in Rimworld are apparently very suggestible and open to embracing some rather extremist ways of living. All it takes to convert someone from their naturalist beliefs over towards the fungus and people-based ideologian of Waus is a few strong words from a very persuasive man named Semyon. Waus. Woos? Was? Woos. I think I'm going with Waus. Anyway, at this point Semyon would like to ask you personally to join my Discord and subscribe to the channel if you've been enjoying my videos so far. The community is growing a bit and it feels great, so get involved or Semyon will break both of your legs and then eat them in front of you. The Fun Guys started like any other regular colony, a group of 3 settlers that covered the core requirements for cave living quite well. They're Semyon, Alans and Maskinen, which I think roughly translates to the machine in Norwegian. Semyon is a man of many passions and quickly becomes the social leader of the group, taking on the role of thought digger. Alans lives for 2 things, taking care of the colony's fungal gardens and delivering headshots at range with a smile. And despite being named the machine, Maskinen is actually a very multifaceted woman, initially handling both the intellectual work as well as the mining. She's also desperate for some bionic parts so that she can really live up to the name. For now, she'll have to make do with a shitty fake ear. The world they live on, Alnilum Posterius, is a harsh place. Even at its equator, it could only really be described as warm, and the gang didn't settle on the equator. They put down their roots further north, in the forests that are for some reason described as temperate, despite existing in a permanent winter, seeing temperatures as low as -18. Celsius, that is. Sorry, Americans, Liberians and Cayman Islanders, you'll have to convert that, but basically it's bollock-retractingly cold almost the entire year. But that's okay, because all that really means to us cave dwellers is that we don't have to run the coolers in the freezer all year round. So they named their colony Won't Eat Ya and got to it. Things weren't exactly easy in the early months at Won't Eat Ya. It's been a while since I've played, so some of that can be attributed to me being a bit rusty, but it's hard to keep people happy living in caves at first, even when they say they like living in caves. Some of this comes from the fact that it's very hard to expand a livable space to properly accommodate everyone in the caves, while you're also keeping a large enough dark area for growing the nutri-shrooms in, especially when you've only got one particularly capable miner, and doubly so when they're also your researcher. As a result, we were living without electricity for a really surprisingly long time. Another thing to know about the followers of Waus is that they like to stay high, which is quite difficult without a good outdoor growing space, so they'd have to struggle through that one for quite some time before hydroponics came into play. At one point quite early on, both of the colony's fighters simultaneously came down with malaria shortly before a pirate raid. Alans came frighteningly close to death, but she recovered and then they gunned down the thankfully impotent raid as they attempted to cross Won't Eat Ya's near impenetrable natural defences. What really helped get things off the ground is the utilisation of a somewhat tricky subject. Oh yes, slavery. That's right, we're a cannibal slaver colony. We've really gone full Rimworld on this one. So with each raid, or sometimes group of refugees, the workforce would grow. The slavery system in Rimworld isn't too advanced. When you have prisoners, you have multiple options, one of which is to break their will and enslave them. Then they live in your colony like anyone else, but, you know, without fundamental human rights. They sleep in their own beds, do whatever work you tell them to, and wait to be told they're next for gladiatorial combat. Sacrifice to Wouse, or probably the best option for them, which is being sold. The slaves have a suppression meter that has to be kept high to reduce the frequency of uprisings, which is done by a combination of stern conversations from that Semyon guy who enslaved them in the first place, and generally living in a terrifying situation, surrounded by scary statues and skulls on spikes, all whilst being dressed like a gimp in a steel collar. From here on, I'll be referring to them as the Help, but just know that they have no choice. With the Help, the fun guys have enough manpower to keep the place cleaned, relatively organised, and fed without having to work on all the minute details themselves, meaning that Maskinen can focus her efforts more on research and art, making those scary statues that I mentioned. Skipping forward in time a bit, the colony has actually expanded with 2 new colonists. One of whom landed and was paralytic for a full month, that's Shorty, and she's actually a bit of a pain in the ass. No, not because she's into pegging, but rather because she's extremely hard to convert to follow Wouse. And to be fair, as an ascetic teetotaler she wouldn't really fit in anyway. But with the amount of drug production there is to be done, I figured someone with a burning passion for crafting could go a very long way. And secondly, there's Hakuja, who I imprisoned but decided to recruit fully rather than enslave. She's a great doctor and pretty handy with plants too, which is also fairly important around here. As well as that, she's bloodthirsty. She fits in just great. At this point, the Help had grown significantly in number, and also shrank a few times. I was pretty fond of Riga, but as a miner it was only a matter of time before something happened, and it was then that I learned that Riga was the son of another slave, Kamba. Whoops. Didn't realise I had a bit of a bootstrap Bill situation going on all this time. Shortly after Riga's death, there was a fairly sizable raid, which we had in hand, no problem, but then the Help decided to be extremely unhelpful and had to be put in their place. Something needed to be done. I had to make the place scarier, because essentially what was happening was that whenever slaves would leave the caves to go and do mining or haul things, they'd no longer be surrounded by scary stuff and they'd start to get ideas. As well as this, Shorty was really struggling in the caves, constantly throwing tantrums and destroying power conduits like the ones that serve the hydroponics room. So I got fed up with her and I threw her in prison, which in a rather fortuitous turn caused her to have a crisis of belief and her certainty in truth technologism plummeted. The perfect opportunity to finally convert her, even if execution was very tempting. Meanwhile, Hakuja demonstrated herself to be extremely handy with a plasma sword in a couple of raids against tribespeople. But overall, things weren't actually going great for the fun guys. They didn't have that much fun, and for the most part they lived in squalor. It felt like when I made the decision to live on the other side of a river from the majority of the map, I was making an incredible defensive decision. And undoubtedly I was. I survived a lot of raids that would have otherwise put an end to the fun guys thanks to that river. But it also made any outdoor task a huge pain in the ass, with haulers having to spend whole days in the freezing cold wading through the river just to haul a few stacks of steel from where they were mined. It was honestly starting to become a bit of a slog playing this colony. I accepted a quest where I'd have to fight a pack of manhunting timber wolves with the help of 2 janissaries from the local kingdoms, which went well. A slave named Chef got bitten half to death by the wolves, and Kamba, who's been in a bad mood for months because of the whole Riga situation, well, Alan's shot him, which isn't ideal. And to top it all off, one of the janissaries basically convert-sniped Shorty. Semyon had her at 0.8% certainty, ready to embrace Wouse, and the bastard jumped in and converted her to fundamental fieltism. What a dickhead. And then all the food rotted away because right before the Timberwolf incident, a raider had destroyed one of my geothermal generators which linked my entire power grid into the caves. The grid wasn't exactly built intelligently, but it's been working out just fine for Texas, right? This is what's called a death spiral in the industry of games that consider losing to be fun. One thing after another goes wrong and they chain into each other until you just can't seem to catch a break from it. So I gave up the colony. The story was told and it didn't end well. To be fair, I didn't play this colony particularly well. The storyteller was Cassandra on Strive to Survive, by the way. which is why things just kept on ramping up and constantly getting worse. I usually play Randy random, but thought Cass would make for a better story here, and sure, I think she did. It wasn't a story of success, mind you, but I actually wish writers would have the balls to go for the bad ending more often, so I don't mind. I was about to say something like the good guys shouldn't always win, and then I realised I was about to refer to a group of Cannibal Slavers as the good guys. So that's what I meant when I said the easiest way to describe Rimworld was to tell a story. If you've somehow never heard of it before, you probably get the idea now without me having to dive into each mechanic one by one. But let's chat about it just a little bit, with another considerably less extremist and much more cozy colony as the background this time. That last line, it turns out, was purely an excuse to play said colony. This game eats away at my life to a seriously dangerous degree. This script should have been finished 2 days ago, but here I am. I just spent the last 5 hours between writing these 2 sentences playing more Rimworld. Ultimately, and thankfully, I always get to a very sudden stopping point with Rimworld, where I just have to take control of my life back and cut the envenomed limb off before the toxin spreads to the rest of my body and I'm lost forever. I've always been very thankful for my own self-control. I would have gotten absolutely nowhere without it. I'd have been the subject of a news story about a kid that played Diablo for a full week non-stop and died in his chair surrounded by empty monster cans. People do often compare Rimworld to an addictive drug. It's one of the few games on the same level as Factorio or Civilization in terms of sheer addictiveness. It really does have that same just one more turn energy as Civilization. Except there's no turns, it just keeps on going forever. And inevitably, the moment things start going badly for a colony, your brain is just cooking up the next one. It never ends. Mechanically speaking, the game's been polished over a good few years and both of the expansions are meaningful enough to be worth grabbing. But admittedly, the biggest value add at this point is the incredible modding community. I kept things almost entirely vanilla for recording this video, but you can go really far if you want to. One of my favourite Rimworld addiction sessions ever involved a zombie apocalypse mod. Having to build an absolute fortress of a base to fend off the constant waves of stinking dead was great fun. I almost started to tell another colony story there. Must stop playing. I have to finish the video. You definitely haven't seen the last of Rimworld on this channel. I'd like to tell more stories, but that's enough for today. Would I recommend the game? No. I mean, yes, obviously I would recommend it, but legally speaking I can't open myself up to that kind of liability. I'd warn you not to go outside because of the continuing bad times, but honestly if you're playing Rimworld that will handle itself. Just don't forget to drink, eat and shit, okay? Until next time, goodbye.